Venerable Venerations, friends and fine... Ah! Goodness gracious, that thing is stinky. Let me just get my mage hand over here. Let's just grab that. There we go. Yeah, much better. Now it can't hurt you. Can't hurt me. Excellent. Venerable Venerations, friends and fine folk. Have you ever had an idea for a creature or a concept for a game mechanic that was really cool in your head but a royal pain in the butt to get from rules as intended into working correctly, rules as written? Well, I had a concept for a creature that was similar to the Acklay from Star Wars Episode 2. The Acklay, specifically, and this scene. There he is. Poor Obi-Wan. Yeah. The concept was very similar to the Acklay's attack. A flurry of claws coming down to attack a foe. But the difficult thing is, especially to incorporate something like that into D&D, is, well, the logistics of it. Do you make many attack rolls? Do you have a saving throw? I explored a couple different options for my own creature, who you saw in the the opening there. But we all get flashes of those kinds of inspirations when you're thinking about something, creating something for a game like D&D. Turning that idea into something usable and balanced is an incredibly difficult challenge. So we're going to take a look at the first creature featured in the campaign Hell's Heart, the Unraveling of Fate, specifically a creature known as the Blighthorn Burrower, an undead creature that burrows underground and ambushes from underneath, and Blighthorn being the location ravaged by a magical plague known as the Rotblade. So we'll take a look into how I tried to get that concept from the Acklay attack into this Blighthorn Burrower, undead amalgamation between a burrowing spider and Draugr. So, we went through a few iterations of this ability, but essentially, this is version 2, I believe. Maybe it's version 3. I don't think I ever started with an attack roll because that would have been too many, especially with the initial concept of rolling a die to basically determine how many attacks it gets. Unfortunately, in a lot of the new rules, 2024 5e rules for D&D, not a lot of creatures have rollable die to determine the number of attacks it has. But I wanted to bring that with the Flurry of Claws, use that idea. So I'm going to be using D5 in this stat block because I am weird and a big nerd. So rolling a D5 to determine how many of attacks. So we'll just read out here. Basically, Flurry of Claws is a recharge ability that basically requires a dexterity saving throw with an initial DC of 10 with a minimum of 1 attack. So if you roll a 1 on the D5, then the DC is 10. You roll and you succeed the save, you don't take the damage. Doggies. Anyways, the difficult thing was I wanted a variable DC and save or failure threshold, and that was the most challenging part to incorporate, because I could initially run it, rules as intended, during episode 1 of Hell's Heart, called Heeding the Raven's Call. Because I designed this creature, I was able to run it the way I had intended. But if some other GM was going to look at this creature and wanted to run it how I intend just by reading it, rules as written, it wasn't really coming across how I wanted it to. So this was version 2, the attempt to kind of get around the variable DC, which is not at all a mechanic that you find in D&D 5e, especially because it's super complicated to implement. But basically, the DC is 10 plus 1 for every subsequent attack roll. So if you roll a 5 on the D5, then the DC maximum is 14. But what happens if you roll, say, a 13 or a 12 on your dexterity saving throw? Do you take all the damage from the attack? Is it a straight up failure? It's not how I wanted this to work. So this is a little bit of a convoluted wording here, but essentially, the failure for the total attack DC is greater than the target's dex save result. It's a bit of a mouthful, a little bit annoying to try and wrap one's head around just from reading it. And I initially explored the concept of rolling a die for each attack, but that got a little bit nuts and could potentially have a lot of damage, especially since this creature is only CR2, so we don't want to have anything super ridiculous. So let's bring us to the actual stat block for the Blighthorn Burrower here. So, it's a large creature, large undead, with a fairly low AC of 13, but it does have a decent dexterity because of its many legs. So it's a little bit harder to hit that way. But you can see here, we'll get to this table in a second, on the right-hand side here. This was my initial attempt to try and get around the ambiguity of the mechanic, but after sitting on it for a couple nights, it still didn't work. So then we come up to the final version here in this stat block. So hopefully this is as written, rules as written is how I intended it to be run. So we'll go over that and then let me know in the comments if it still needs extra work, because this is probably version 3 or 4 now of this particular ability called Flurry of Blows. But we'll take a quick look at this lovely looking creature here. Yeah, beautiful, coming out of the ground to attack you. Wouldn't want to be in that guy's way. So, okay strength, decent dexterity, nothing really in the negatives except charisma and intelligence. It's not a very smart boy. But he has decent stealth, as his burrowing speed is one of the biggest things that he has in his toolkit, or it has in its toolkit. And of course, being undead, immune to poison and poisoned, but because he is kind of animated by a magical disease known as Rot Blight, he's also resistant to necrotic damage. So, taking a look here of some of its traits. It just has a basic aggressive trait where it has advantage on its initiative rolls, and a silly little trait called Bound to Happen. Because I kind of envisioned some of these mechanics, based them off of some card concept ideas for my own CCG I'm working on. That works around being restrained, bound, shackled, whatever you want to call it. So this thing's a little bit nasty if you become restrained, because if it moves towards you at least 20 feet and you're restrained, large or smaller, it deals some extra damage with its claw or bite attack, which we'll get to in a few moments. But you can see its Flurry of Claws. This is the final version after many iterations, so hopefully the final version is the most polished it can be in terms of trying to convey the Flurry of Blows mechanic that you would see in the Acklay into this Blighthorn Burrower. So it's still the exact same thing with the dexterity saving throw DC 10, but in parentheses, hopefully it makes it a little bit more clear with this +1 for every subsequent attack roll. So minimum DC 10, maximum DC 14. So the wording now is one creature against which the Burrower makes 1d5 melee attacks, while bloodied, i.e. at half hit points or less, the Burrower makes 1d3 attacks instead of 1d5 attacks, because I have d3s as well as d5s. I also have d7s, d9s, d11s. Oh yeah, I got all the weird cursed dice. But here's where hopefully things become more clear with the failure of this particular saving throw, i.e. the dexterity save result was 8 or less. If you roll 8 or less on the die, you take however much piercing damage associated with the number of attacks made, which you can check in the table as well. And here I have a little asterisk If the dexterity save result was 9 to 13, less than a DC, again, to avoid any ambiguity, check the difference from the DC and refer to the table below. So we check the table. So if 5 attacks are made, and you roll a 13 on your saving throw, you will take 2 damage. Pretty straightforward. And if you roll a 9 and on your saving throw and the DC was 14, again, somehow rolling 5 on the number of attacks, then you will take the maximum 10 damage, which is still a lot of damage, but it's the average of 5 1d4 attacks, because you can see here its claw is plus 5, 1d4 plus 3 piercing damage, but I did not feel like rolling a d4 for 5 attacks. Plus, I had initially worded that you add the modifier to the end of all the attacks, but now it's much simpler. All you do is 2 piercing damage, depending on how many of attacks actually hit you, depending on what you roll, and so hopefully it's clear with the variable DCs for the dexterity save result written in the stat block there. But other than that, it has basic claw attack, 1d4 plus 3 piercing damage. If it's just out of reach, the burrower can kind of drop prone to extend its reach as I bang my elbow on my desk. Fantastic. To add 5 feet of reach, technically the attacker would be at disadvantage at that point, but he has 10 feet of reach. But it's a little weakness you can exploit, because it will take half its movement to stand back up. He has a twin claw attack as well, which features into a bonus action here, which we'll get to in a moment. But basically, if you take the attack action with this thing, instead of doing Flurry of Claws or a claw attack, twin claw to do a little bit more damage there. And then it's bite attack. Uses 4 plus 4 to hit here, a little bit less than the claws, because it uses its strength on this one rather than its dexterity for its claws. So it does a little bit more damage overall, potentially, because you're rolling a couple more dice here, but it is only 1 attack. We see bonus actions, so if a creature dodges all of the burrower's attacks, it doesn't land any attack with its Flurry of Claws, it can make a twin claw with advantage against the same creature. So it's very aggressive, very deadly, and you don't want to be in this thing's way. You want to act quickly. Luckily, it doesn't actually have a ton of hit points, only 26, so you should be able to finish it off fairly quickly, especially with a party of 4. And if you take the standard attack action with this thing instead of Flurry of Claws, and you decide to do just the claw attack, you can make another claw attack as a bonus action. And then its reaction is triggering. Trigger is a creature the burrower can see, ends its turn within 15 feet and is not within 5 feet, so not within melee range. Immediate melee range, it can burrow under the ground and ambush the target from underground. Because on a failed DC 13 dexterity save, it takes 1d12 plus 3 piercing damage. And if you succeed, nothing happens, it just misses. Save or suck ability. A little bit of a description here describing what it is, a little bit flowery. But something I have included in my stat blocks now and will be in the future for sure, inspired by the Monsters of Drakkenheim book. Fantastic book for making monsters and using different actions within combat more useful. So particularly they use the study action, but I also include the search action you can use to look for any weak point, which we'll get to in a moment. But basically, when you take the study or search action on your turn, rather than just trying to recall knowledge about a monster potentially or look for a hidden creature with the search action, now you can specifically look for any exploitable weakness with the search action, and of course still recall knowledge about a creature you may wish to know for a particular encounter. But basically I word it like this. Characters proficient in a certain skill, usually 2, sometimes 1, or who have encountered the creature before have advantage on certain checks to recall information about it or look for an exploitable weakness. So you have some flowery names for some knowledge that you may recall, and recognize. You recognize the Burrower as was mutated by the Rot Blight, so you note its resistances and immunities. If you roll a 10 or more, you learn it's very aggressive. You're probably right. You learn of its aggressive trait here, because that would make sense. So I'll update that later. But you recognize the Burrower's aggressive trait and its Flurry of Claws attack. And then, since it mutated limbs from the Rot Blight, normally they're just regular zombies or drug or however you want to call them. Bipedal creatures. The Rot Blight has mutated them to grow extra legs, to be more spider-like. Sorry if there's a trigger warning for any folks who have arachnophobia, who are watching. As reasons unknown as to why the Rot Blight mutates like that. That's still a mystery. Basically, you learn of its tremor sense and that its legs are a weak point. So, in my games, with some creatures, not all, you can learn of a weakness or a weak point that you can exploit. If it is a weak point, generally you can make a weapon attack against it, and the weak point shares the creature's armor class. It's not going to have a variable armor class. It's not going to be like a called shot or anything like that, because that can make things more difficult to keep track of at the table, especially for newer players and a new GM. So it shares the Burrower's AC, and the caveat is instead of having higher AC, the attack is made with disadvantage instead of a higher armor class. And on a hit, both the weak point and the Burrower itself take the damage. So no separate health pools, although it does have an X number of hit points to keep track of. So just one extra little thing there. But if the Burrower is also under any condition, its legs are under the same effect. So if the Burrower is restrained, its legs are also restrained, so you have advantage on that attack, so canceling out the disadvantage. Nice. So its rotten legs, each leg has 5 hit points. When one leg is severed, it has the bloodied condition. Specifically, this ties into the Flurry of Claws mechanic. Its attack, where it can only make 1d3 attacks. So that's what that is referencing there. Once 2 legs have been severed, it has the following effect. Severance. The Burrower can no longer use its Flurry of Claws action. Flurry of Claws? Wow. Flurry of Claws action, and its burrow speed is halved. It still has other legs, but it's less effective with 2 fewer legs. And then these are, of course, combat tactics for GMs to look at. But that's basically the Burrower in a nutshell, and the challenge of trying to create a concept in your head to bring it from what you intend into rules as written, especially into D&D. So, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the first Homebrewed Alchemy video, where we take a look at all of my homebrew within the world of Ambriel, especially in the Hell's Heart Unraveling of Fate campaign. This was the first creature that the party encountered in Ravenhorn, and it's gone through a lot of iterations to try and get the mechanics of this thing correct, but hopefully it is a well fleshed out stamp block now, and if you want to run something like this at your tables, feel free. Thank you very much for watching again, and have a good night.